This crowd rises to its feet. Vaccaro slammed it home. Garland left wing, free ball. Perfect! Garland right of the lane, lobbed to Mobley. Pow! And Allen blocked the shot at the rim. Pow! With the left hand and a foul.
Welcome to the Chase Down Podcast, part of the Cavs media family. I'm your host, Justin Rowan. The Chase Down is presented by Fubo, the official streaming partner of the Cavs. Watch over 350 channels of live sports and TV, including FanDuel Sports Network, without cable. There's no cost and no commitment. Try for free at FuboTV.com/Cavs. Well, it's official. The Cavs have their first losing streak of the season. We knew it would come at some point. We hoped that we were wrong, but unfortunately it is here. The Cavs dropped a tough one in Philadelphia and then playing their third game in 4 nights against the Houston Rockets, dropped another game against Houston, but all 3 games coming down to the wire with an opportunity to win, just unable to pull it through. Joining me today is my co-host, Carter Rodriguez. Carter, how you doing, buddy?
Losing streaks suck. They're way worse than winning streaks, I found. And, yeah, I mean, it stinks. On one hand, you're banged up, you're not playing your best ball, and you lose these 3 games by 1 point, 3 points, and 4 points. You know, so a combined 8 points of differential hit in a 3-game losing streak, you would kind of feel like maybe that's good news. But, you know, I really just don't think they're playing good basketball right now. And I think they'd probably tell you the same. You know, falling double digits down to a very, very beat up Sixers team. You know, and in both Rockets games, they had to make furious comebacks to make the score respectable. Now, of course, that Rockets game they should have won, but they only should have won it based on a pretty stupid foul that put Darius on the line to end the game in the first place. So I don't think that they're playing good basketball, and you know, I think even though the numbers look close, there are certain stretches where you see this differential over 3 games and you go, yeah, but if you probably should have won one of those. You know, sometimes you have bad bounces and stuff. And they certainly have had a few of those, but I'm not sure they really deserve to win any of the 3.
I totally agree. I think, honestly, these games are similar to some that we've seen earlier in the season. The difference is they didn't come away with a win, right? We've seen them turn it on. Game that comes to mind is that Toronto win recently with Mitchell out, where weren't really playing great basketball, turned it on in the fourth quarter, and that was enough. We saw that early in the season where they would turn it on in the fourth quarter and come away with comfortable wins, right? They had their legs under them. They would pull away, get the stops they needed, hit the shots they needed. And it just seemed like no matter kind of what the process, that was going to be the result. And honestly, like, I want to see wins. No, that's not going to be a surprise to anyone listening to this podcast, but I'm not even like that frustrated with these ones because I feel similar to you, where it just didn't seem like they deserved to win any of these games. They turned it on in the fourth quarter. They had an opportunity to win every single one of them. But when you're practicing bad habits and you're turning it on late, particularly against a good team like Houston, you're going to get caught, right? Like, you become susceptible to something like missing a free throw, right? Like, that was a theme in all 3 of these games, was missing 1 or 2 free throws down the stretch that could have changed the outcome, or at least had you in a position where you're playing for a tie rather than intentionally fouling to extend the game. It just, you know, the longer you kind of let those habits fester and the longer you continue to play that way, I think sometimes the harder it is to break out of it. And at least from a macro standpoint, I'm not incredibly concerned about what's going on with the Cavs. I understand they've been down bodies. They have a big lead in the Eastern Conference. Like, this is kind of the dog days of the NBA season. But from a short-term perspective, they got to turn things around fast, because Detroit is a better team than what we played in Philadelphia. Even though Paul George and Tyrese Maxey are very good players, Detroit's a more complete team, and they're going to make you work. The other 2 games they got coming up are against teams that they've had letdown games against, the Atlanta Hawks and Miami Heat. So they've really got to turn things around, go through another 3 and 4 stretch, and I just don't think that they can afford to approach these with kind of that same mentality of, you know, maybe 10 to 15 good hard minutes is going to be enough to come away with a win.
Especially with another home game coming up on February 4th against the Boston Celtics on national TV. that the Celtics are 4.5 back, and we've talked a lot about how we're kind of appreciative of the Celtics for kind of being the thing that keeps the Cavs sharp. Well, time to go prove it, because it's only a good thing if they don't catch you. And you if you muddle through this next stretch, then lose to Boston, you could very well be looking at a two game lead, 2.5 game lead going into the All-Star break, and those get closed all the time. That's not a very big gap at all. So what looked like a no-doubter first seed in the East is, I'm not saying it's in question yet, but you drop a couple more and it probably is. The rest of these top teams are just winning too often for you to get away with not.
Yeah, I totally agree. And, I think what Kenny Atkinson was saying post game, where, it starts with defense, it rang true, right? Like, we thought that Houston was going to test them on the defensive end, right? Like that they were really going to make the Cavs offense work. They were going to be physical, that they were going to get them out of the rhythm. And we saw that for a brief stretch for that game in Houston, but through the two games, the Cavs got very good looks from three. You look at that game in Cleveland, even though, it's a tough schedule situation where you expect to have dead legs, the Cavs performed incredibly well offensively. Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland, Darius 39 points, Mitchell 33.
Yeah, you put up 131 on a healthy Rockets defense.
Right. The two of them, 16 assists to 4 turnovers. That's great. Like, they did absolutely everything that, you'd worry about against a very stout defense that's going to apply a lot of pressure, right? That when people say, hey, the Cavs
only
struggle at time.
No, sorry, 11 turnovers. ESPN's box scores are still broken, and I'm losing my mind.
That's tough for you, buddy. But when people say the Cavs struggle against length and athleticism, we on this podcast say, athleticism and pressure, because I think the ball pressure has been kind of the bigger story. The concern is on the offensive end. Does the offense hold up? The offense held up really well. They just let it go on the defensive end. And I think what Kenny was saying post-game about it starting at the point of attack and allowing easier drives to the rim is absolutely true. And, that's Darius, that's Donovan, that's every single perimeter player on this team needs to be better at that spot.
Yeah, I mean, the defense has just been bad. And it just stops them from doing all the things that kind of makes them devastating. You're just not getting a lot of transition opportunities when you're taking the ball out of your own basket every single time. And I think it also puts the onus on their half court to work even better. And, I came into this podcast expecting to rail on turnovers. They're not really turning the ball over that much. It's just every turnover feels like prison, because if you're not getting stops in the half court, then a wide open transition opportunity or a pick six kills you. So, I think it's one of those things where you have to be careful, as always, with not treating symptoms, but instead treating the illness. And I do think right now the illness lies on the defensive end of the floor.
Yeah, I totally agree. And in particular, I want to focus on that point of attack. I want to focus on the second chance opportunities we're giving up. They've had some bad luck when it comes to opponent 3-point shooting, but I'm not even stressing about that, because, we fought that uphill battle over the years. That always normalizes. But even with that, they had a chance to win all of these games.
This was a top 10 defense early in the year, even when their opponent 3-point luck was very poor.
Right, because they got the job done in other areas. And you look at what's happened in January. Prior to January, they were 7th in half-court defense. They were 2nd in the league. They were the second best defense at defending putbacks in terms of how much, how many points per possession they were allowing on those types of possessions. In January, that half-court defense has dropped from 7th to 27th. That putback percentage has dropped from 2nd to 30th. They allow more points off of putbacks than any other team, and that is going to hurt your half-court defense, right? So when we're talking about what they're struggling with defensively, it's stuff that they have done before, right? Like we know that they are capable of this. I don't think after 3.5 years, it's, they've been figured out. We've even had stretches like this. Looking back at last year, March, April, they were in the mid-20s when it came to defensive rating for those months, right? And normally that would be big cause for concern. Hey, you're heading into the playoffs. You're bleeding points on the defensive end, and the defense held up very well in the postseason. Some of that, Orlando's not a very good offensive team, but they did a great job against Boston without Jared Allen, right? So I
did a great job against a very good Knicks offense 2 years ago.
That's a great point, right? Like, so we've seen this in stretches. We understand that this is part of, the NBA season. And even when it comes to that 3-point shooting, I couldn't believe this, Carter. I looked up how many wide open looks with no defender within 6 feet the Houston Rockets get versus every single team. Guess where the Cavs rank in terms of how many they gave Houston versus the rest of the league? 30th. They gave up fewer wide open looks than any other team. They only gave up 12.5 wide open looks. Houston just shot 60% on that. You look up at like the top of that
list.
Which
literally is the difference between 2 wins and 2 losses if you look at the final scores.
It is. But the thing is, even with the 3-point shooting, if they did a better job on the glass, if they were, containing at the point of attack, if they were playing defense like they did in the second half and the fourth quarters of both of these games for a longer stretch of the game, they would have come away with wins in these games, even with that opponent 3-point shooting. We saw the 19-0 run when they turned it on. We saw in Cleveland when they turned it on and the effort was there from the beginning. And they made their big runs. They got back into these games. They gave themselves a chance to win. They got to do their work earlier. And the most frustrating part is when I look at these 2 Houston games, I feel like they came out with the right mentality. I thought that the defensive effort to start this game against Houston was on point. It seemed like they understood their assignments. It seemed like they had the better process, and they just took their foot off the gas for that middle portion of the game.
Yeah, it feels like the Cavs from 4 years ago before they got good a little bit, where how many times were we clinging to those 5-6 minute stretches of really strong and high competence where we go, oh, see, they can do this. And now, the bar is kind of flipped where it's like, well, no, now I need you to do it for 48. And if you're not doing it for 48, it's a problem. I'm not looking for signs of life. I'm looking for best team in the league. Yep. So, I think there has definitely been a focus problem. These are not wired, really there's only been one wire-to-wire ass kicking, and that was the OKC game. Mm-hmm. Other than that, there have been these runs, but to your point, when they make these fourth quarter bursts, it's going from down 6 or 8 points to up 16, not down 22 to down 6. And it's just I just think they're leaving themselves such a big mountain to climb. From a numbers perspective, where you have to exert all this energy just to only be losing by a little, and no wonder the free throws haven't been as reliable down the stretch. No wonder that you are counting on hitting every important shot that you take, because if every shot you have to take for the last 5 minutes of the game is a must hit, then you're probably going to feel disappointed about the team's performance in the clutch. Now, I'm not saying that there isn't actual problems they've had in the clutch. I mean, we talked about that in our last pod, in that first loss where we thought the process kind of went awry. But they are just setting themselves up for an unwinnable perception battle, Yeah. And
you're going to have bad luck in those spots.
Eventually, there's still a lot of luck in this sport.
But you can control your own luck by how you prepare, how you play the previous 48 minutes, right? It's sometimes you have to do more work to do less work, right? And I feel like they are making their lives harder for themselves, right? Like if you go grocery shopping and you don't plan ahead of time, what's my meals going to be for the week? What do I need to have?
Well, you don't need to attack me, Justin.
You're going to walk through the grocery store. You're going to spend more time in there, and then you're going to come home. You're sitting there with some chicken breasts and 2 cucumbers being like, I guess I can make a meal out of this. But if you actually plan ahead and you do the necessary things, you're going to make your life easier for yourself in the long run. And we talked about the defense on the last podcast, and we're going to be talking about it here. But one of the things that we said that was different is, well, they are playing more zone, so maybe that's something to keep an eye on. The other thing that's different from last year to this year is no matter who is available, and now we're seeing guys missing time within the rotation. No matter who's available, we're going deeper. We're still going 10, 11 guys deep within the rotation, and that is a difference from last year. So when I'm thinking forward towards the playoffs, I'm not as worried, because if these guys are available, I think that the rotation is going to naturally shorten. That's just what happens in the postseason. Even Steve Kerr will shorten a rotation in the postseason, right? But at least for what we're going through right now in the regular season, we're going to go deeper. We're not going to overburden our guys. Maybe we win one of these 3 games last year because our starters would have played 38 to 40 minutes in those games, right? But for the long term, I think this is the correct approach, right? We understand that we want to have everyone fresh. We want them to be healthy. We don't want them to get these soft tissue fatigue injuries that we've seen in the past. So I can't sit here praising going deeper in the rotation earlier in the season when we're winning 15 in a row, and then flipping, being like, hey, we should have shortened up the rotation here because we lost a regular season game. The understanding has to be we're going deeper, so we need to play hard in all the minutes that we do get.
Yeah. First off, I mean, you're right. And it is hard, even with the team banged up too, because I felt like in that, hand up in the Rockets game, I feel like, man, we're just playing too deep. We need to just lean on our starters more, our top rotational players more. Darius played 36, Donovan 37, Max 35, I believe his season high by a mile. Niang had a great game. He plays 29. And then Kenny really only played an 8-man rotation in practice. He played Jerome 18, Merrill 17, Niang 29, so there's your 8. And then Thompson and Porter only played 10 minutes combined. So it's I do think there's a bit this is why you have to check yourself a little bit, because you feel like you're going too deep, but in the end of the day, you really played a functional 8-man rotation. And, Thompson was a +3, Porter was a +1. So it's not like you died in those 10 combined minutes either. So I don't know. Obviously Evan only playing 29 was a little rough. But he was on a minutes restriction, or they were trying to be cognizant of that coming off of an injury where he missed multiple games.
Yeah, I had no problem with that.
So I don't know. It's a weird thing, and ultimately, I do think that this Rockets team just presented a lot of weird problems for them. But what I would say, the more I've thought about it, and as I've gotten away from my emotional reaction, I do think a lot of it is less personnel based and more discipline based.
I agree.
You can't. You're going through that fourth quarter. Every time Şengün posts up, you send help. Şengün misses, and Amen Thompson comes and flushes a putback or gets a pass cutting to the hoop. And it's you got to help smarter and from different places. The help can't come from the same place over and over and over again.
Yeah,
because Şengün's a good playmaker, and Amen Thompson is a 100th percentile athlete in this league. And so if he gets a step, and George Niang has given him that step because he's consistently putting a foot in the lane to try to help on these Şengün post-ups, it's just it's cooked. They're going to get a bucket, whether it's Şengün, forcing something up, or Thompson cleaning it up. They're gonna get a bucket or a foul every possession.
Yeah, and
Boy did that.
And they're going to have a productive possession, whether it's Niang and Allen or if it's Mobley and Allen in the paint, right? When you are allowing that easy penetration, it just makes the job of whoever is on the interior way too difficult. And I think, thinking back to earlier in the year, it seemed like we made the analogy, or we made the comparison to what Kenny talked about with the French national team, right? Where guys are playing in 5-6 minute shifts, so they're playing really hard in those minutes. There's an understanding that they're going to be subbing in and out. You were very correct in pointing out, hey, Darius and Donovan did play a lot in this, Houston game. But I feel like in general, the effort level from top to bottom has been more of a, we're going to play 36 minutes a night kind of effort, rather than, hey, we're playing 28 to 30. Let's really go hard for those minutes. I just feel like they're picking their spots a little bit more. And I think they were able to pick their spots in the past because, you had Evan Mobley and Jared Allen healthy back there, right? You had Isaac Okoro, you had Karis LeVert, you had Dean Wade. Even if you didn't have all three of those guys, you at least had them for prolonged stretches.
You're bigger, longer, stronger.
Right. Now that you're in a situation where, hey, Jared Allen gets in foul trouble, we need to play Tristan. We need to play Craig Porter Jr. We need to play Jalen Tyson. We're going to these guys that haven't had as much time with the main team. You're going to have breakdowns in communication. So much of defense is knowing where everyone else is going to be, and continuity is so important for that, right? So one of the biggest strengths for the team, continuity, is no longer there. There are some heavy lift lineups happening as well. Like there was a lineup where it was Darius, Ty Jerome, George Niang, Sam Merrill, and Tristan Thompson. Like that is a heavy lift lineup for Darius, right? Even for a 3-4 minute stretch. So I think there just needs to be more urgency. There needs to be more focus and just kind of an understanding that, hey, if the first 3 quarters we're playing at even 80-90% of what we are capable of doing, we're probably going to be sitting for the last few minutes of the fourth quarter here.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's been kind of a bad cocktail, man.
Mm-hmm.
The bad point of attack defense kind of kicks things off. And that initial, the initial wall isn't built. So, other teams' role players or even their stars and their role players are getting 2 feet in the paint with little pushback, which means that either the help is getting there too late because they were expecting more of a fight to get put up. That happened a few times last night. Or they're having to pre-rotate and get there early. And I've talked a lot about how this team is at its best when they get to hang in their defensive shell. The shell gets compromised like that,
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you're in heavy rotation and you're behind the play because your focus and intensity isn't where it needs to be. And then you start making mistakes because you're just not used to being so behind. I forget exactly who on Houston had the ball, but there was one possession where they got into rotation. Cavs are trying hard. Once they got into rotation, everyone was working hard. But when you're not working hard with focus and with strength, you end up sending Max Strus and Craig Porter Jr. to the corner at the same time. And they're almost running into each other trying to contest. And it's an easy swing to the wing for a wide open 3 for, I want to say it was Jalen Green, but I can't remember. Doesn't matter. It was probably Van Vliet with his 403 in the last 2 games against us. So I just think the focus has been rough. And then, and maybe that's where I think some of our gripes with the zone can come up, because it's we're not even executing the man well. I don't want to add another thing to execute well in, but I don't know. What do you think about that?
I think it's a valid thought. It's one that I have, and I have to check myself because, just from a basketball philosophy kind of standpoint, I'm not the biggest fan of using lots of zone, but I've also seen really good defenses use a lot of zone. I've seen the Cavs execute zone.
They've won games
really well
with the zone.
They've won games with the zone. So I don't want to kind of put my biases on this and say, that's part of the issue here, because I think it comes down to effort. Whether you're playing man or you're playing zone, effort and focus has been kind of that primary issue. And Kenny, said it in that OKC win where, hey, we're not getting stops in man, so we went to zone, right? Let's just try something different. Let's try anything to get this back on track. And it ended up working in that spot. So I can't really fault continuing to use it. I think it just, as you said, it's coming down to that focus. It's coming down to the effort and making sure that you're in a position to succeed. And being in a position to succeed is so important, Carter. That's why you need tools like Zoom AI Companion. Only you can do your best work. Zoom AI Companion can help you do the rest, like automatically taking notes, answering meeting questions, and helping you respond to your coworker. Available at no additional cost with eligible pay plans. Work happy with Zoom AI Companion.
You're absolutely right, buddy. Great segue. But yeah, the zone thing is it's just a little weird to me, and I don't know. I think I'm like almost being like a grump boomer kind of energy of like, we're gonna hang in man till we figure it out. Like, which is not how you should make coaching decisions. But it's like, I don't want us to stop playing man because we're not getting stops. I want us to get stops playing man defense because this is a team that knows how to do it.
I'm so happy you said that. And, this is one of those spots where I love that we just get to approach this from a fan standpoint, because that is 100%,
Do you feel that way?
That is like an armchair. Yeah, I'm sitting on my couch, just man up until you figure it out. I totally get you. I like the energy. I understand, but I also appreciate the fact that you said this is silly on the front end.
Well, yeah, it is very silly. It's not the way any coaching staff should think, but maybe it's the way I'm feeling just watching the team struggle to get stops, which is which is obviously frustrating. And then I do think I much prefer the zone with our best defensive personnel on the floor, which I know sounds counterintuitive because the zone is kind of supposed to be like, it's like the knuckleball, that kind of changes the energy. But it's like, I just feel like our ability to execute the zone goes way, way up when we've got a little more size on the floor, a little more athleticism on the floor, and the team's focus and energy is already where it needs to be. So
I think the athleticism is a big component in this too, right? Like it's even someone like Max Strus. I feel a lot better when I'm looking at his game since he's been back. I feel better about his defense in man-to-man. And it's funny, he obviously played a lot of zone in Miami, but he wasn't a very highly rated defender in Miami. It was last year playing a lot of man that he was a highly rated defender. And I wanted to start this off by talking about, execution, the focus, what they can do with the personnel they currently have available. Because I do think, and history has shown, with the personnel they have available, we know that this team is capable of playing good defense. I know what the January numbers look like, but a lot of that is their worst two defensive performances were these last two games. It's the only time they've had a D rating in the 130s, including nearly 139 in that last game against Houston. That's going to skew a month sample. That is like, that's nuts. The best offense they had played at the time was the Phoenix Suns, which was their best defensive performance. I know this team is capable of playing very well on the defensive end, and that was the game without Evan Mobley. As Mobley gets his conditioning back, I expect him to continue to make the impact that we've seen that is going to have him in that Defensive Player of the Year conversation. All that being said, now that we've discussed everything that they can do with the personnel that they have available, I do think it's important that we note who is out of the lineup, because so frequently people talk about Isaac Okoro, who not the highest stocks player, even though that started going in the other direction this year, and we're seeing him contribute in more spots. But so many times people go, well, where's the impact? But when you really look at it, they were 9th defensively when Okoro hurt his shoulder against Brooklyn. Since that point, or from that stretch when he hurt himself against Brooklyn to when Evan Mobley left the team with a calf injury, they dropped to 15th. So that was with Mobley helping and healthy, right? That also includes 5 games with Isaac Okoro. I should note that. He wasn't healthy. He wasn't playing as many minutes, but in the minutes he did play, they had a 107 defensive rating in those minutes. He makes a difference on that end. And now you look at the stretch since, they're 23rd defensively, right? 12th on the season. So Isaac Okoro, he makes a big difference at the point of attack. I think his athleticism really matters. And even if he's only playing 20 to 22 minutes a night, that has a trickle-down effect on the rest of the lineup. That has an effect on how hard Mobley and Allen have to play defensively in the minutes that they're playing with them. That saves energy for later in the game. Karis LeVert has been a good defender, but I want to give Okoro some flowers because we don't know when he's going to be back with this AC joint sprain. But when people always say, where's the impact from Isaac Okoro? I think you're feeling it through this extended absence.
I think you're right. And like, I think, sometimes I can be in that group, where I can be a little hard on the lack of the box score stats and things like that. But I think you make a really good point about how even in short minutes, it just gives them an extra tool in the toolkit that makes them, we've talked a lot about, as whether on this podcast or privately, about the team's roster construction. And I think both of us have been really loath with any kind of off season that ends up with Okoro not getting re-signed, or any trade that, were to send Okoro out, because it's like, well, he does the one thing he does like degrees of magnitude better than anyone else on the roster. And like, having that level of specialist adds a lot to what you can do. And it allows you, even as a coach, to be like, all right, we're not getting stops. I'm playing Isaac 9 minutes in a row and putting him on their best guy to see if he can gunk it up, and make things a little messier. Or I'm going to play Isaac with the two bigs, and we're going to switch like crazy, and no one's going to get anything off the bounce on us. Like, but you just don't have the option at all for those 20 minutes. We think of 20-minute per game players as, low minute players, or, certainly not high minute, but you're almost half the game,
Yeah.
And, to your point of the trickle down, it is there. So I think they're definitely missing Isaac, but I also don't think that can be a crutch for them either.
No.
And I'm not saying that you're saying that, but like, they do just have to play better on that end. They have to take pride. Think about how hard Darius was working in that first Celtics game to stop Jason Tatum from turning the corner on him. How hard Donovan Mitchell worked on closing out on balance and really exerting himself to make sure he was a sharp team defender. Like, there's just not been a lot of that up and down the roster right now. Like, and yeah, it's a lot harder when Niang is the weak side defender, because Jarrett or Evan got pulled into the primary action. Like, there are some structural things here, but that's where I go back to the focus and the intensity. That's stuff they can control, and that's, there's just no version of this where they should go from 9 to 27 or whatever it is, in the month of January. I could see it drop to 20, 15, 20, somewhere in there, but you can't be just ahead of the Washington Wizards defensively. If you're a team that's really trying to take a 1 seed sprint seriously, which I think they're a team that should. Justin,
yeah. I was about to say that that's what it was, and then they had these two games against Philly and Houston, right? Which again shows you the volatility of a small sample. Yep,
but they count. Is all I'm saying. Justin, I'd like to talk about the hacking Steven Adams in the third quarter.
Okay.
And just a general thing about why I wish we didn't do it. Okay. So yes, Steven Adams hit his free throws. That made it worse. However, I think that so much of what makes this team special is their pace, is the fact that they can press an advantage and kind of and get you sped up and get you stressed. And the reason I think maybe past versions of the Cavs, I'd be more into the hack. I don't want to sign up to play Houston in the half court on offense every possession. Adams is not a good free throw shooter. I want to say he's like 43% for the season or something like that. That's 0.8 points per possession about, if you were to math it out. But like, I don't think you're going to meaningfully outperform that metric trying to score against a set Rockets defense over and over and over again, especially when I thought your offense was really cooking. I thought it really I thought it kind of took them out of the game. And, obviously the differential blew up. I'm really trying not to account for that because a lot of it was Steven Adams hit every free throw, and
you're focusing on the process of it, right?
But I don't think that's the road to expanding. I don't think that's the road to a significant point differential win, and I'd rather, especially in the regular season, where like your process is maybe supposed to outshine results a little bit. Like, I also don't think we're learning anything about how to guard the Rockets by doing that. So that's my brief diatribe on why I wish we didn't do the hack.
Well, I hope you feel better.
I do.
It's one of those things where if you're playing with more consistent effort on the defensive end earlier in the game, you may not feel the desperation of, all right, like, let's try this, right? Like, okay, we got Tristan back in the game. Let's use some fouls here. Let's, send him to the free throw line and see what happens. I agree for the most part, especially, we're trying to do ethical hoops here, right? Like,
I am an ethical hoops supporter, and I just don't like watching hacking, which is another fan take.
Totally fair. But again, right? Like, if you're playing defense more consistently, you're not going to go to these, kitchen sink type strategies. I can't even speak to get some stops, right? To kind of change the momentum of the game. So I mostly agree with you. The one thing I wanted to point out, kind of getting back to that Okoro point, is having him in the rotation also just kind of helps from a continuity of lineup standpoint. And they just haven't had a whole lot of that. And I think one of the areas that is really apparent is in the Darius and Jarrett pairing. The Donovan and Mobley pairing has been more stable. They have two lineups that have played over 150 possessions. The Garland-Allen pairing doesn't have a single pairing lineup that's played over 150 possessions.
Interesting.
The leading lineup with Allen and Garland has 132 possessions. The second has 71. Mobley and Mitchell have three lineups of over 100 possessions and two over 150. So I think that is one of those spots where when you don't have that continuity within the rotation, it's going to make knowing kind of second nature understanding of where everyone else is going to be defensively a little bit tougher. The most consistent, two guys that we see with every single combo is Merrill and Niang. So, from that kind of standpoint, you feel at least somewhat comfortable with them, but not having, Karras available, that was kind of one of the biggest pairings with Garland and Allen. Not having Okoro to stabilize things on the defensive end has made things tough. And that's been a pairing that's struggled defensively. When you look at those just Garland and Allen minutes per cleaning the glass, it's a 121.5 defensive rating. And most of that has come both at the rim and from three. Opponents are shooting 41% from three against that pairing. I have to believe, like, some of that is variance. It doesn't line up with what we've seen the last few years. But the percentage at the rim isn't great. It's 66.2% at the rim, 48th percentile. When you look at the Mobley and Mitchell pairing, it's a 102.8 defensive rating, so almost 20 points better. Opponents are shooting 32.5% from three, so a whole lot better. And they are allowing 60.6% at the rim, 94th percentile. So Mobley is holding up as that solitary defender at the rim. And from the outside perspective, I really struggle to attribute it to anything other than variance, just because the most common guys are still Merrill and Niang in both of these pairings. But I do think when you look further down the lineup and you just see so many different changes, so many, Ty Jerome, Craig Porter Jr., Jalen Tyson playing with that Darius and Allen pairing, I do think that the lack of continuity has hurt them in those spots.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I don't really have a ton to add other than, I think Okoro has always played really well with Darius. I think they have good chemistry together. Good
screener.
Good, he can take those tough matchups at the point of attack, up and down the lineup. And honestly, I just think Jarrett's just Evan has kind of surpassed Jarrett as a big man defender, and I think Evan can cover up a few more warts on that end than Jarrett. Not a lot more, but I just think giving Jarrett a sidekick on the defensive end, just goes a really, really long way.
Yeah, and like the individual defensive splits, like people will look at Okoro's on-off defensively, and a big part of why it's not as strong is because he did get so many of his minutes with this Darius and Jared pairing, right? Where there has been some bad three-point luck. Basically, like your defensive rating, if you're one of the guys coming in off the bench, is very heavily influenced by how much time you're spending with Donovan and Mobley versus Darius and Jared. And I don't think Jared has had some big fall off on defense. I think from an eye test perspective, Darius is playing the most aggressive and best defense of his career. So I don't want to say it's all on them. Some of that is the variance, but that's, one of those spots where for like Sam Merrill, as an example, I think he's playing great, defense for what he is able to do. But I think his defensive rating is stronger just because he has played so much with that pairing. Whereas with Okoro, yeah, it's not as great with, that staggered pair, but the defensive rating is 4 points better when Okoro is with them versus when it's not. So he is still having an impact within the context that he's being put in.
You're absolutely right, buddy. Can we go from large sample talk to small sample talk?
Yep.
Max Strus has been starting. And with Evan Mobley's return last night and with Dean Wade and Isaac Okoro's injuries, Max got his first start with our starters from last season that we barely got to see. Your thoughts on how it's looked? They've only played 20 total minutes together, which is rough, but have a plus 20 net rating in those 20 minutes. I gotta tell you, Justin, I just am a little worried that the team's poor performance over the stretch might get used against Max when I think the starters have looked very good.
Well, the good news is if you're looking at the last few years when it comes to the Cleveland Cavaliers, whether it is coaching, whether it's the approach of the front office, outside noise and Twitter has never had an impact on decision making. And thank goodness, because I've seen some wild takes already, even with this 3-game losing streak.
Yeah. They played 12 minutes last night, by the way, plus 8.3.
There's another example, right? Like you're going to be staggering. You're playing a deep rotation. Your starters aren't going to play as many minutes together. But I think it's a very, very encouraging sign that they have been so good this season. Even looking at the clean and glass numbers filtering out garbage time, right? Anytime they're playing with a small forward this season, including Max Strus, it's a plus 11 net rating. And they've been good on both ends. So I'm encouraged to see Max starting to find a groove. I think he just makes a lot of sense when it comes to the starters. We've talked about that all year. I would expect this, barring injuries, to kind of be what we see moving forward. I think we saw something similar where Isaac Okoro was starting in place of Dean Wade, and Kenny cited, hey, we're winning. The lineup data is even stronger than the Wade lineup. We're going to keep it going. And understanding that Kenny is a lineup data guy, I have to assume that as long as this continues to go this way, this is probably going to be the way that it works out. Because as good as Dean Wade has been, or at least as good as our record has been with Dean Wade in the lineup, it's been the weaker of the starting lineups. It's just a plus 5 net rating on clean the glass, where when it's with Karras, it's plus 23. When it's with Okoro, it's plus 10. And as you said, plus 20 with Max Strus. It just has been better in the different combinations. And their numbers as a whole have been so much better. Dean Wade's numbers have been better at the power forward. So I just, assuming that Wade, his injury isn't something long-term here, I do think that this might just be kind of that opportunity for things to naturally settle.
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways, and this is going to be informed by our opinion here, but I think in a lot of ways, no one wants Dean to get hurt, and I really hope he gets back, but I do think it makes a hard situation a little easier to handle, which is like, hey, we've been really good with you, but also Max is, our best option at the small forward spot. And you've made the case really eloquently on past podcasts about how you just get more lineup flexibility when you don't have to start with all three of your defensive bigs as your starters.
Mm-hmm.
You can make that call of like, in this matchup I want Dean, or in this matchup I want George, depending on kind of what we need so far in the game, especially as you get into postseason basketball. I think, I don't think the starters have been the problem. And in some cases, like going back to where we started this podcast, talking about how deep the rotations are, this is where I kind of go, I get that you want to play 10 and 11 guys, but one limitation is that your starters, who are one of the only high volume lineups you have that are working right now, don't only get 12 minutes together. Like I haven't looked it up, but I got to imagine the Knicks starters are getting a little bit more than 12.
I think that's a safe assumption, Carter. I talked earlier this year,
but I don't want them to do that either. To be clear.
Yeah, here's the great irony. We talked earlier in the season about, as people who have enjoyed some Warriors slander over the years, it has always been kind of funny that, one of our driving forces of our offense is a point guard that really, idolizes Steph and wants to play on and off ball like him and studies the film, and Kenny Atkinson bringing over this Warriors offense and all that. Now we're getting the other side, which is what Warriors fans have complained about with Steve Kerr, which is we're going 11 deep no matter who's available, right? And it's funny. Well, not that we're complaining about it. We understand it, right? And I think, honestly, this is the right approach for the long term.
It's us figuring out how we feel about this stuff. And yeah.
I'm just appreciating the irony of it, because I messaged, our buddies that cover the Warriors. I'm like, I get it. And their response was, it is 100% the right decision for the long term, but absolutely, like, you understand it on an 82 game basis of, maybe some of these losses turn to wins if we're not taking this approach. The flip side of that is maybe some possible wins in the future would turn to losses because guys get worn down. They miss time. We saw what happened last year when
someone gets hurt and then your seventh man isn't confident, and yeah.
Garland and Mobley missed time last year, and everybody that was playing more minutes during that time has knee issues and wear and tear injuries, right? Like, we have seen enough of that to know that this is absolutely the right approach. As I said earlier, this is an approach we praised earlier in the year. Be incredibly hypocritical to start blaming it now. But the realities of it is just, you're going to have to understand, we're going deeper, so let's play hard in the minutes that we have. Everything they need to do is stuff that we have seen them do this year.
Yeah.
It's stuff we've seen them do in the past. It's stuff they're going to need to do. Like, people need to take the lesson from the offseason where they wanted severe roster changes to fix every single issue. We've already seen that this roster is capable of fixing those issues with their own internal play, right? It's the exact same thing when it comes to this. People are, looking at Cam Johnson, who's the best role player kind of available, at least publicly, on the trade market. Even if you added him without giving up anything, he wouldn't help any of the areas that they are currently struggling in, because he is not, even though he's very tall, he's not a talented playmaker that's going to be, that wing ball handler that takes pressure off when your guards are being pressured. That's not his game. He is an okay defender, but he's not a lockdown defender. He's not, someone that's going to start clamping down larger wings and whatnot. So you are going to have to solve these issues internally, whether or not changes come at the deadline. So there just has to be that kind of understanding and, the mentality that isn't just, all right, quick fix, let's make changes, let's, blow up everything because 3 games went not the way that we wanted.
Yep.
You got to have a little more resiliency than that.
Yeah, you got to, I mean, the reality is the real solution to this 3-game stretch is to hit the play better button. Yep. Like, I don't think these are terribly structural. I mean, there's some stuff, and we've tried to point to that stuff, the no Okoro, the lineups where you are asking certain things of certain people that maybe you wouldn't if you had everyone available. But like, this team won plenty of games shorthanded this year, last year, etc. And generally it's because they executed better than they're executing over this 3, 4, 5, 6 game stretch. And I know it's the least interesting thing to say. Be focused. Use that focus to channel into high effort and play well. But like, really, I think that's what the team needs to do the most.
And probably good that we saved that until 50 minutes in, because we could have
we really
would have
podcast. We would have really let down our Cavs overlords with a 45-second podcast.
We would have let down our audience. They want to hear us. You know,
do they?
They always support us no matter how the teams play. Yeah, they do. They you know, I'm I at least need to tell myself that, you know, if it's a lie, we fight on that lie, Carter. But you're right. They just need to play better. They just need to focus harder. And, you know, I get it's tough. This is absolutely the time of year where this kind of stuff happens. And that's probably contributing to me not being as stressed. It's just going to come down to when they get sick of this, right? Like when was the last loss enough? Was 3 in a row enough for them to kick into that other gear and say, we're tired, but it's a couple weeks until the All-Star break. We're going to get a rest. Let's finish strong. Let's maintain this lead that we have and go into the last third of the season with a dominant lead in the Eastern Conference. Because, you know, as frustrating as it is to lose these games and have a 5-5 stretch, they still have fewer losses than every other team. Like, everyone has gone through these stretches. Boston has gone through their 5-5 stretches, right? And Cavs aren't going to get the same benefit of the doubt, and they shouldn't. They have more to prove.
The Thunder have one less loss than us, by the way.
Oh, damn. I didn't even realize that. Well, you know,
we no longer have the best record in the league, I'm afraid to say.
Best record in the East. And you know what? The East is what really matters. But yeah, like, you know, it's going to happen. It's frustrating. We said during the winning streak that there's going to be a losing streak at some point. I will say now, there is going to be a winning streak in the near future as well. It's just a matter of when it comes together, when enough is enough, and they lock in and start playing the type of basketball that we know that they're capable of. So
yeah, I certainly don't think they've lost anything. I'm annoyed, but I'm not stressed, which I imagine is probably how the locker room feels.
Yeah, totally agree. And we'll see when it turns around. They have an opportunity to do so tomorrow against Detroit, but that's going to be a tough test. Playing, you know, Atlanta, playing Miami. All of these games this week are opportunities for them to right some wrongs of the past and turn this thing around.
Yep.
Big thanks.
Real quick programming note. We should note no live pod the rest of the week and the next week, as I will be abroad on a work trip.
Well, you are a traveling man. We know this about you. Safe travels. I'm going to miss talking to you, but we'll have some great shows in your absence as well. Big thanks to everyone that tuned in live on YouTube. Make sure you guys like and subscribe. Click that notification bell so you know when we're going live. If you're listening via podcast and you want to support us, leave us a rating, leave a review, subscribe, unsubscribe, resubscribe, and help cook those books. If you want to be part of Chase Down's exclusive Discord chat, send a screenshot of their review to chasedownpod@gmail.com.